when we teach each other something, especially something to do, a skill, or a task to do each day, the first plane on which we can communicate, in which we show each other something, a task or a skill, is in the physical plane. And in the physical plane, teaching something to another person, like learning in the physical plane, is as simple as imitating. One needs not know what one is doing. One needs not know why. One needs not know other ways of doing it. One needs not know the development of this task, of the skill, of why this form instead of any other form. One can just exercise imitation, and a skill on the physical plane is transferred fairly simply. It takes time to be able to learn or teach from and to one another in the deeper levels, in the subtler levels. For instance, imitating something exactly as another person does it replicates in the physical plane. However, the desire to do it, the will to do something, to do a task, is not always transmitted. As in, maybe I'm passionate about trimming my garden. I'm passionate about trimming my garden, and I want my garden to be exactly 1.5 meters tall. The hedge around my garden. And so I can teach someone to exactly cut the hedge exactly at 150 meters. And they may learn it physically. And they say, okay, yeah, I'm doing it. And they can do the exact same task. However, they need not share the initial desire that fueled this rule, this measurement, this preference. It was, in this example, I think, me who had that desire. Oh, I want this hedge to be 150 meters tall. And I know why. It's connected to my feelings, to my own experience, to my sensations. And if another person comes in and takes this task and they replicate it only physically, they don't have that desire, that same desire, that emotion that drives me to say, I want this. To them, it might just be like, yeah, they may not want that. Maybe they want the money that comes along with doing that task, that comes in exchange of doing that. Or maybe they want the experience of cutting a hedge. Or they are nice and they want to provide someone a favor. What I'm saying is the initial emotional desire that fueled the first task doesn't always need to go and get transmitted to the other. When it's not, communication is not complete, I would argue. I mean, communication of the whole workflow. Like, there's a workflow of ensuring that the garden hedge is 150 meters tall. And if I don't, and this standard has many planes. That's what I'm attempting to represent. There's the physical act of keeping the hedge at 150 meters. There's the desire of knowing, okay, this is what I want. And then there might be also a mental reason, a why. 150 saying like, oh, because that's exactly, that's taller than any of my other plants, but only just. And I still want to be able to put my head over the hedge. And that's by experience what I've found is exactly right for me. So there might be these reasons as well. And these can or may or may not also be transmitted along with learning of the task. Like, I can just say, oh, I want to cut at 150 and that's all. And then they go like, and then the other person goes, okay. And then they don't need to know anything else about it as long as they know the physicality of it. If I explain a reason for it, and I explain what reasoning, what thinking came along to make the physical task of bringing the hedge up to 150 meters, then that communication is more complete in this way. The whole workflow is being transmitted, is being learned more wholesomely. Because then this person might know the why and the act. It's like, and it's very different. To me, it's like if you're simply imitating in the physical plane any task, be it a skill or a language, certain word usage, or social norms and etiquette, and saying please and thank you, or angry patterns. All of these we learn. Replicating them in the physical plane is simple, and it gets things done. It seems to me, however, like similar, like if only the task is taught, then it's not rooted. It's not rooted in something that fuels, that keeps the task alive, in a matter of speaking. When I imagine this, it feels like by teaching a task only in the physical plane, like, okay, this is how it's done. It's like we're just, like I have a plant, and I know this plant, and I know this plant all the way from the roots, through the stems, into the leaves, into the branches, and the fruits and the flowers, and I have all of it. And I know the plant. I have it all because I have the reasoning from which I grew. I have the desire to do it. I know the details of this task, of this workflow, or of this concept I have. And if I just teach someone to do it in the physical realm, without explaining an emotion or without transmitting the other planes, I feel it's like I'm just showing other people how to make the flowers. And then I'm only giving them part of the whole concept. I'm only telling them, hey, I want these flowers. Can you make more of these flowers? And then I teach them how to make these flowers. It's not so much about making the flowers. It's like the knowledge of knowing the how to do it. It feels like it's the flower. It's like almost the end result. And maybe they can have the flowers. So I give them some flowers. I give them a couple of my flowers I have in my plant, and they They have it, and with that, they can continue the task because they know the shape. They have the reference with them. However, these flowers are unrooted. They don't have the stems, they don't have the leaves, they don't have the roots that ground this task to the fuel of reason or the fuel of emotion. If the roots are not there, the task, the flower, will last some time. Maybe it can last for a long time. It can even be dissected. I feel it could even be like dried up. Like people when they have a task, I'm thinking in the terms of longer decades and centuries. A task is given, and then there's this flower, and this flower is still like, okay, it's working out because people replicate the task exactly, and somehow the knowledge of the stems and leaves and the roots has been lost. And then as the decades and centuries go past, the flower is still in the same shape exactly as before, and time has passed, so maybe the flower is drying up, which is analogous to the context not applying anymore. Things are changing, and there is no root to, it's not alive. If the task is not alive, it doesn't have this flexibility to change as needed. It doesn't know what to do, where to go. It doesn't know how to evolve because it just remains its shape. It just has one shape. So it will either dry up, and then I see that then people could be driven to say, oh no, what will we do with our task? No, we must keep doing our task. And then they dry it up, and they keep the exact shape, so they always have the flower because it's a useful flower. And then eventually they just have this dissected flower, this dried up flower that has the same shape, and they can continue to do it. That's how I see that traditions are started. The founding of traditions. They are tasks that were useful, that were rooted in whys and intentions and truth, and it grew. It was born from something alive. And with time, the deeper parts of it were lost, were forgotten, and everyone just kept the flowers. Even if they're dried up, there's still the comforting image of what was before. Teaching and learning in the subtler realms takes, in my experience, more time. Because it's often the case that we grow up without specific knowledge or learning or teaching of our subtler senses, of our emotional senses, of our mental senses. We grow up I grew up without an explicit teaching that there are subtler senses that we can feel. So I imagine that many of us have learned to ignore or to be numb to or to simply just We didn't develop the sensitivity to the subtler realms, the subtler planes. And so direct teaching of these planes is somewhat more complex. It's like trying to teach, not exactly blind, but maybe colorblind people the difference between the different colors. It will take some time. It's not obvious. And much of it can be done by inferring from the physical and perhaps by just recognition of patterns through the physical and then realizing, okay, what's the core of what is the core? What is the root that actually drives this flower? Because if I see this exact same flower 50 times, I might not learn much. But if I see the same flower, but the same kind of flower, but done 50 times in slightly different ways, I might learn the actual pattern that generates these. Mm-hmm. But this showing of the path of something 50 different times takes time. It's a more effortful endeavor. And that makes sense on to why in the last century or two, according to the history that I see around, education has been we're getting fast education these days in the standard Western society. We're taught how things are done. People try to teach us why things are done and why it's important that these things are done. But education in the subtler realms takes more effort for both, for the teacher and for the learner. And more importantly, I would say the learner requires wanting to learn. And the teacher requires wanting to teach. And I believe that it's often the case that even the teachers do not know that there are other planes to consider. If one teaches only the how, one creates skilled a workforce, which is useful. It's sort of a tool for capitalism to continue moving forward. And if you want to accelerate that process, then it makes sense to train 10 times more workers who don't necessarily know how or why things are done in that way, but they know to do it, how to do it, than 10 times less people who really are knowledgeable in the craft, all the way from the why and the how, and they've tried many times, and they become intimate with the art, but they're just not as many. It's so different. I saw this video the other day about Henry Ford having been the person who not who first brought up the idea, but who popularized the idea of, the assembly line. and that really transformed the workforce from people who needed to know crafts in detail because they would make a whole product all by themselves, or at least specific parts of the product, but by themselves. They knew what they were doing. To an assembly line where each part of the assembly doesn't need to know almost anything about the whole process, maybe just about their neighbors, and they can focus on just a very, very specific thing. And it doesn't really matter that they know why they're doing it, or that they even want to do it, as long as they do it. That's all. Like, that's the focus of that strategy. It seems like quite a natural tendency in the process of acceleration. Of intentional acceleration, we will try to see what pieces, what unwanted pieces of the process can we just slash out, trim out, keep it lean, keep it lean. How do we keep it lean? And if the deeper and subtler education can be, if that's optional, maybe we can just trim it out and you just know how to do it. And that's enough. Then again, if humanity really, if we only taught the next generation just how to do things, we'd become automatons, societal automatons, or die. Methinks. Because if we really did that, if we really only taught the how, which is implausible, but in the concept, by playing just for concept, it would either succeed in a material level, in which everyone is perfectly indoctrinated and knows exactly what to do. Then we could become this fast-moving society where each person is strongly linked to his and her role, and not so much to his or her experience in each moment. That is really what an automaton is. It seems to me. It's a direct consequence of the definition of automaton. Automaton is someone that, well, it automates something. It automates a task. And because it's automated in the way that we know it, it's a predictable thing. It's a state machine. Giving a certain input, it will do a certain output. And what that means is that this person, this being, is tied to his or her role. He is the role. That's an inference of the definition of automaton to me. The being becomes the role. They merge, indistinguishable. When the being and the role are indistinguishable. They have no agency. There's no independent agent in the being. Everything is determined by the input and the state. And if we were to become a race of that, then we'd be simulating species like ants, where I was just seeing a YouTube video the other day about ants. They can build these amazing, enormous colonies that in which each ant really he has a role, and they execute it faithfully, and they may die and by protecting their colony, and they do not hesitate. They know exactly what they're built for. Soldiers attack and defend, builders build, and everyone's doing something all the time. Busyness. Yes, ants have this very strong link with busyness. Bees too, busy bees. Always doing something. And then the other alternative is that whatever automated tasks we were trying to impart to the next generation does not survive, is not effective for the upcoming contexts, for the context later on. And if the whole generation passes and everyone loses their rootedness to the whys and the wants, then we will just end up doing the same thing all the time, being predictable. And then if the context changes enough that strategy, that automaton strategy is no longer useful, valid, does not apply to a new context, we may die off because our strategy is no longer fit to survive. And that is the extreme example, naturally. My feeling is that we humans in this age, we are adopting a mixed model, hierarchical model of education in which some people, a certain subset of people, are educated wholesomely in the physical, in the mental, in the emotional, in the spiritual, and some people in some more, in the others in some others. Like my feeling is that scientists and engineers and technicians and scientists, engineers, what else? Doctors, perhaps. Lawyers, in a way. A lot of their education is mental plus physical, in varying degrees. And then there are the artists, music, musicians, the painters, and the planes that they're educated in are emotional and physical, of course. Like those are the stronger ones. Like they require mental, of course, and the mental ones it could do with some emotional, but they're not always. They don't always have it that flavor. And then that's for some of them, and then some also with the spiritual planes. And then there are many others, likely a majority of people, who are educated less wholesomely, only in the physical plane. They are taught how to do things, and the intent of this system is for them to drive the physical gears of our society, to plant our food, to drive the trucks, to man the grocery stores, to move the boxes, bring the food, cook the food. I don't mean these tasks cannot be rooted. Each of these tasks has arisen from a rooted, pristine feeling, from a pristine experience. And any of us who does these tasks can, of course, integrate their emotional planes and their mental planes and their spiritual planes into them as well. The more we do it, the more fulfilled we will feel with our tasks. What I see in society is that it seems that the intent of society is for that to happen, for a majority of people to be educated for the sake of economy and not for the sake of their development. It's like Brave New World. I barely remember that book. I read it a long time ago. But in there, Aldous Huxley describes very clearly the hierarchy that the humanity had very explicitly become. They were what is it? The gammas, the betas, the epsilons. I thought it was like B, C, D, Cs. Like they were given grades. Like there were they were the E minuses, who are the janitors and the lowly workers. And it was D, and then it was C, and then it was B, and as you went up the ladder, usually you had positions of more prestige and of more wealth and you went through C, and then you had the B, and you had an A, and you had a double A. And that actually also, what that meant was how good quality your genes were. How good of a quality your genes were, because at some point in that book, they figured out how to make everyone smart and strong and powerful and amazing to be individually powerful. And then in that book, they mentioned how they made, in that world, in that fictional world, they made an experiment. And they placed what was it, 100? 100 of these genetically maximal people. And they said, okay, well, there you go. They left them on an island. And they just said, okay, well, live, survive, and do your thing. They just left them there, and everyone was intelligent and powerful, and everyone had very strong genetics. And in that experiment, it turns out that after 100 days or a year, I don't remember exactly, either everyone was dead or everyone was dying, and or there had been a lot of conflict and very few people were still alive. Like, the point it was trying to make was, when people are strong, they're trying to be stronger than the other. And if everyone's at the same level, then you cannot reach an equilibrium, because there's always conflict. If there are several people of the same strength, if there's no alpha, it's almost like they keep looking for who's the alpha. Well, who's the alpha? Who's the alpha? And to do that, there's constant conflict. Something like that. And then in that book, after further adequate experimentation, they figured out that there was a certain mix that worked for society really well. And it was, well, similar to the natural distributions we see these days, where there are only a few people, relatively small amount of population that are strong, that have very, very strong genes and very strong skills, and are intelligent and are strong and powerful and good looking. And then there's another layer that are more, but are not quite as good quality. And then in the next lower layer, you have even more people, but then there are even lesser quality, and they go less and less until the majority is all the way in the bottom layer, or in a couple of bottom layers. And their genes are just average or below average. And that's the natural way. Like, that's the equilibrium that the humanity inside us is looking for. And I do find that point intriguing, because these patterns are seen in nature. All over the place there are hierarchies, and power laws are found all around. Leadership is seen in nature. Species with coordinated movements, they either meld together into temporary or permanent collective organisms, like birds in a murmuration, or fish in a school, or ants, or army ants building huge paths of destruction and eating animals out from their bivouac. And in all these cases, they are all fairly perfect automatons. Well, I don't know about the birds. They seem to meld into some kind of together collective intent without leaderless. And we as humanity, I don't know if we know how to do that. And then the other option is to follow a hierarchy, to have leaders who embody the intent of the group. Embody the intent of the group, fairly like embody it and focus it. To do that wholesomely, the leader requires listening to the group and truly embodying their intent through their body. It is when a leader disconnects from the group that unwholesomeness enters the system, because the link is broken. The link between the head of the leader and all the branches and roots and everything that makes up our society, something is severed. And when it's severed or numbed, this leader cannot embody their intent. And he or she will take actions to, well, being a leader, and these people, this sector of society that is not being heard will protest, try and shout and try to be heard. And it is the leader's role to listen to them, to listen and see how to embody their intention. Human leaders these days, some intend to embody the group's intention, the collective's intention. Some do. It seems to me that some do not. The stereotype for leaders, especially for political leaders, is that they do not embody the group's intent. That they rather focus on their own intent, on their own gain, on their own desires, and that's what they embody. And when that happens, well, the collective is not being heard. And I visualize it as a leader, perhaps ensuring that the image of something continues to run, like the physical aspect of the structure of society that can continue to run. Let the post continue running. Let the movie theaters still be open. Let the restaurants be open. Let are the buses working? Are the planes working? Is everything running smoothly? Is the supply chain not broken? And a leader might ensure that that's taken care of. Even that, already doing that in human society feels effortful. But even if that's done, and the intentions are not really listened to, well, then that energy is blocked and the people do not feel listened to. That's congruent with my own experience. I have rarely or perhaps never felt emotionally associated with leadership, especially political leadership. I feel I have learned to completely detach from any interesting political leadership. I don't remember perceiving a trust in political leadership. I perceived a lot of mistrust in political leadership. And I realized how much energy is sometimes spent by people focusing on this discontent and this mistrust of political leadership. And I believe I instinctually realized that I did not want to spend this energy. And I feel quite emotionally detached from any kind of political leadership, even though all of my life I have lived in the society, in the regimes that political leadership leads. Policies and politics shape the towns I live in, the trains and trams I use to move around the city, the grocery stores that I go get my food in, the regulate and manage the schools that I attend. They regulate the companies that I have worked for and that give me money for me to go get more food and grocery shopping. There's political leadership in international transportation. Any planes from one country to another are being managed by all these political leaders. Mostly indirectly, but they are. And I have no emotional attachment to it. That's a realization right now. So yes, I'm emotionally severed from political leadership. Not mentally so. Mentally, I do feel curious sometimes. I can go and poke at ideas and concepts about politics and hierarchies and such. But yes, emotionally, just the thread is not there at all. Anyway, we can learn at many different levels. I believe it's important to be aware that teaching and that learning it can be much, much, much deeper than just knowing how to do something. That is the shortcut. It can be the shortcut. it can be the shortcut to truly learning something. And the flower alone does not remain alive forever, or even for a long time. A flower alone does not survive. A flower alone does not adapt. It needs at least a connection to the root. And in this analogy, the root is our own experience. The core of our experience. Is there something inside of us that a bodily sensation, that is the root? Do I feel a bodily sensation related to this task? If I'm a carpenter and I carve up a chair, do I feel delight at seeing a finished product, at sitting on my finished product, and do I feel satisfaction? Do I feel inspiration? Do I feel passion to change, to tweak, to perfect? That's the root. And it doesn't mean it needs to be emotional. The root is different. The root is in the physical sense, like the feeling of satisfaction. It's different to say, oh, I feel satisfied. Yeah, it feels satisfied. And to feel, okay, where are you satisfied? For me, it tends to be a relaxation of my abdomen and of my back. Somewhat hunching, not hunching, somewhat like releasing shoulders back. Like, It has that bodily effect. That is the root. And it can be from anything, and into this body, because this body is our anchor while we are here. It can be mathematics. It can be certain formulas and equations or geometric shape that can be connected to a bodily sensation. To me, triangles have a different bodily sensation than hexagons, or than prime numbers, or than integer powers, or that complex numbers. They all have different bodily sensations, and they are not specific. They are, I can only locate them sometimes. However, they translate in a way to something in my body. And I remember when I learned mathematics, the moment I feel I grasped a new concept, that I understood it, I felt this like, it felt like a new channel had been carved inside of me, and that suddenly things were flowing through. Like, like I can feel a connection from somewhere in my body, somewhere in me, to that concept. Like I can replicate it. I can play with it.
That's when I recognize, yes, I see it, I feel it. It that's when it's rooted. When we feel that sensation, that connection, that it's that. It's like, do I just feel? Do I feel the want to cook something in like do I feel the connection between my body and how things are cooked? Do I feel the balance of the flavors? Do I feel the imbalance? Like, oh, too salty. How does that feel? Like, oh, is there a lack? Is there a need? Is there an attraction? Is there a repulsion? Is there what is it in the body? That's the root. What I'm wanting to say is for our learning to be alive and to contribute to our wisdom, more than just to our knowledge, it is important that we root our learnings into our body, that we root them. And that may require looking at it, relearning it, learning it in another method, pondering on it, rediscovering it, experimenting with it, playing around with it. And then there is a moment perhaps after meditating on the concept for some time, there is a moment when our introspection digs deep enough that it reaches our body. It's like a trench, like we're digging a trench. Eventually, like that's where the holes are, and eventually it's closing, and then suddenly, I got it. It's like I got it. That's when you get it. I got it. The channel is open, and now we know we have a connection for our body. We can move it. It's not something we take for granted. It's something that comes all the way to our body. And that can be anything. It can be driving, it can be cooking, it can be swimming, it can be skydiving, it can be the Pythagorean theorem, it can be Platonic solids, it can be the genetic codes, it can be molecular biology, it can be history, it can be law, medicine, sex. Well, sex is very connected to the body anyway. Yeah, but sometimes for many people it is not. It is sometimes obscured and shallowed up only at the emotional level. Sometimes it's just a cycle that remains in the emotional level and doesn't go all the way down to the root, but rather uses the physical only to keep an emotional cycle going through, moving, because sex can be used in, well, things like power games, or cycles of needs for approval. Cycles shallower. Let's connect our knowings to our bodies. It requires some introspection, some pondering on it, research. I would call it research, whether it be outside or inside. It is research. And it can activate more of our potential.